Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. We are the Infoblox crew, both me and Phil here. I'm going to start sharing our screen, and we're going to actually start showing you some slides and what we're going to be walking through today with you. And thank you for joining us on this little journey. So again, I'm Kevin Zettel. I'm a technical marketing engineer here at Infoblox. And of course, with me today is my colleague, Phil. Phil, will you introduce yourself for just a second?
Certainly. Thanks, Kevin. My name is Phil Miller. I'm Phil at Infoblox.com. I'm a principal solutions architect here at Infoblox, specifically on the service provider team.
Thank you. Yeah, and what we're here today is to show how Infoblox is teaming up to reduce risk with Infoblox and Red Hat Ansible automation platform. And what we want to show today is a pretty cool demonstration, but we also want to talk about what Infoblox is and how we're incorporating these third-party vendors today and try to give you guys an idea of where we're headed and what you can expect from Infoblox as a whole. So with that being said, the presentation today is we're going to show you what an ideal solution looks like. What is Infoblox and what can you expect from it? Then we're going to combine the DDI threat intel and context and what you can grab from that and how you can share it with these third-party vendors. We'll actually have a slide presentation with all of that with it. And then, of course, we're going to get into the meat, what you guys are here for today, the Ansible and OpenStack integrations. We're going to talk about that. Phil's going to highlight some really interesting points for us. And then he's also going to show you a live demonstration. So not only are we talking about what we can do, we're also going to show you it, right? And this is all limited by your imagination of what you would want to do, right? And so let's go ahead and get straight into it then. Actually talk about the Infoblox overview here and what we are. So Infoblox is a DDI security solution for your enterprise class software. And what we're doing are enterprise class networks. And what we are, again, DDI, DNS, DHCP, IPAM, and that's the majority of what we do as a business today, at least. And including on that DDI product, which is the base of what we are, we have security, that enterprise class security to keep you guys protected at all times. And we have high performance DNS caching, we have 4G, 5G service selections, we have infrastructure security, cloud automation. And what's cool about us is we can be deployed anywhere, right? So we can deploy on AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, you name it, including we have hardware appliances. If you need some sort of hardware option, we have that. We also have options for SaaS, right? So if you want us to manage all that backend infrastructure for you and you just manage it yourself and get started today, that's another option that you have. And we're able to do all the DDI solutions that you would ever need. We can report on everything so that maybe you make a change. We're able to actually visualize that for you. You can then enact on what you want to do with the changes. Also, of course, we have network intelligence. We're able to discover devices on your network so that any point now, you can actually see all the devices, all the network, all that infrastructure that you would ever need to have. Of course, we also have that security, able to block third-party. Using these third-party feeds, we have our in-house feed as well that we're able to use to help protect you, things like phishing emails. We also have threat intelligence, threat analytics. We actually look at your DNS data and the pieces that we're looking at and try to correlate if something might be infiltrating data through your DNS, which is a blind spot for a lot of major next-gen firewalls today. And we're just enhancing your ability or improving your ability to protect yourself from these malicious actors. And of course, we also have a cloud-native network, of course, working in AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, you name it, and we're able to push all of our appliances to the edge, right where your customers or your clients are located, to make that optimal solution for you and that return on your investment much better in the long term. Now, what does the ideal solution look like today? Well, let's start with an increased SOC maturity. And what I mean by that is that inside the SOC, typically customers or people, SOC teams have multiple platforms, right? And inside of that, each platform comes sometimes in its own silo. And so what Infoblox provides these siloed devices is the context that they need to be more efficient, meaning we are that one place of presence for that pane of glass for all your assets, all your networks, right? We see all that DNS traffic coming in and out. And so when these third-party vendors ask for, hey, what was this device at this IP at X time? We can give them that information, their IP address, their MAC address, all the other context with that lease potentially or that router, and be able to let them correlate whether or not this might be a real threat, right? And giving them the ability to, we're increasing their agility, which is that third point there, right? We're automating it. We're giving them that context. We're giving them the information that they would need to know in order to prioritize threats. Because honestly, a lot of these SOC teams are getting overwhelmed with a lot of incidents that are coming in, and they need to know which ones we need to actually look at and which ones aren't so important. And being able to share this information between third-party vendors, which is what Infoblox is doing today, and you'll actually see some of that when Phil gets to it with Ansible and OpenShift and OpenStack and the live demo as well. And of course, we're also combining DI threat and intel into that context for your SOC team. So these security operations centers are right now reaching out to a bunch of third-party vendors and a bunch of different resources. What Infoblox has done is taken all these third-party vendor sources and combined it into one spot, which is what we have, and including our own, of course, threat intelligence feeds and threat context, and they're able to see it within our platform. Now, that's awesome that we've done that for you, but additionally, part of that increased SOC maturity of automation is we've given you the ability to push it out to these third-party vendors, right? And we'll see a little bit of that in a second with, again, Phil, what he's going to be showing. So not only have we combined it into one source so you can have a single pane of glass, but now we're sharing it with these third-party vendors as well so that you guys can not even lift a finger and have the ability to see the context and prioritize threats quickly, right? Remediate the issues that need to be remediated. Of course, that single pane of glass is also what we're providing you guys. We're able to pull in all this information. We know we're the single source of presence for your networks, your devices, your zones, your stub zones, everything. All that information is in one spot. And of course, because of that, these third-party vendors like OpenStack, VMware, AWS, Azure, all these guys are wanting to see visibility into that information and get context of what it is, and we're able to share that out with them. Now, how we're sharing this out, of course, we're gathering it. We have this platform that we built to gather all this information in, but how are we actually sending that off to these third-party vendors? We have something called an ecosystem. This is what we call it. And it's this back-end engine that when these threats and these incidences, maybe a new network's created, occur, we're able to push it out to these third-party vendors automatically using Stix and Taxi, REST API, and third-party protocols. And this could be things like your SOARs, your ITSMs, your web gateways, your SIEMs, you name it. And we'll actually see some of that in action today in the live demonstration. But what we need to know is all that DHCP data, when there's a new lease, for example, or you create a new range, that information can be shared with these third-party vendors really easily through our ecosystem engine that triggers events and pushes it out to them, including IPAM data. That could be A records, host names, networks themselves, right? So whole networks, maybe some assets will want to know about that. You can push out as well. And of course, DNS data. Of course, again, that's the A records, the host name records, all that context, including devices as well, right? So that's something that maybe isn't completely understood, but we actually discover all these devices on your network for you and put that in an IPAM, this database sheet, so you can look at it, see it, visualize it, make it easier for you to understand what's happening in your network. We take those devices and we share that context with these third-party vendors again. And this is really useful for things like, let's say, a SOAR, right, or a SIEM, right, where you have maybe a ticket or some sort of incident that occurred and you're looking through the SIEM. You can find an IP, but you don't have the rest of the context of the event. Easily, Infoblox provides that information to that SIEM, right, and you're able to visualize who did it, when they did it, and how they did it. Now, of course, I want to talk about Blox One threat defense and Blox One as a whole today as well. So Infoblox has several different solutions, which is our NIOS on-prem devices, right? And you can manage it all on-prem. But of course, we have a SaaS solution too, and that's our Blox One platform. And what it allows us to do is run all of our security up in the cloud, and you're also able to manage all your assets up in the cloud as well. And what threat defense is not limited by is that CPU, memory, and RAM that you would need to have on-prem. We're holding on to that, and as such, we're able to give you a bigger context of everything in your network much faster. Again, we're not limited by that CPU, RAM, and memory. Of course, you can buy more and more, but again, it's unlimited in the cloud, and we're able to give you a better insight on what's happening. As such, because of this, we're able to protect not just on-prem, but also in the cloud, the malware and CNCs. We have data exfiltration that we're able to block, DGAs. Those are kind of the DNS security aspect that are blind to most firewalls today. but also we're able to consolidate and distribute that threat intelligence, not just from our on-prem solution through ecosystem, but also from our cloud, which pushes it back out to these third-party vendors that you're hoping, your threat, your firewalls, your SIEMs, your threat intelligence platforms. They're able to receive that information that we're grabbing from our Blocks One platform. And again, this is where somebody would query out, go to a malicious site, or maybe even click on a phishing email link. They'll click on it, they'll go to a malicious site unintentionally, but threat defense will block it, right? Not only will it block it, though, we'll share the context with another platform. Maybe you have a ticketing system for your SOC team, and it will send them a ticket saying, hey, user A happened to go to a malicious site, and this is the time in which they did it. Here's their credentials, here's their MAC address, here's their everything that you would need to know to quickly determine, was this actually malicious, was this an accident, and how much time should this SOC team really be spending on the security incident that just occurred. Now, that could be changing based off of the information that we send them, and they need that information, however, and they're not going to get it unless they have something like Infoblox today. So with that being said, I'm going to pass it off to Phil. Phil, will you please go ahead and take it from here and tell us a little bit more about the Ansible and Infoblox integration and how we're working together today to make everyone's life easier.
You bet, Kevin. Thanks so much. So Infoblox and Red Hat, as two companies in the internet, have a very special relationship, right? So Infoblox has been providing VNFs and CNFs for years and years, and Red Hat is, of course, a leading provider of platforms and infrastructure. So us working together in harmony here to produce orchestrated, automated, and security solutions is really the key message we'd like to get across here today. So the Red Hat Ansible integration between Infoblox and Ansible Tower, quite specifically, is what we'll be demonstrating here today. Ansible is, of course, available as a playbook driving engine in an open source variety as well. And a great many of our orchestration solutions and automation solutions work pretty well there. But the orchestration and RESTful message bus we'll be discussing today do require the Ansible Tower solution, as it provides a RESTful API on the Ansible front end there. So I'm not going to read across the slide here. The conversation should be fairly intuitive. We're going to deploy things faster and in a templated sort of environment, making use of this relationship between Infoblox and Ansible. And just to drive the point home, this is well supported both in the community by Red Hat, by Infoblox. So as you're working on playbooks and working on tasks and working on integrated solutions, you'll find that there's not only a great commercial support architecture here for you, but a community that's willing to pitch in and help both on the Infoblox and the Red Hat side. So as we move forward here, this is sort of a pictogram of the integration or the demonstration that I'll be showing here today. This is Infoblox and the reporting engine, as well as the security event and sort of the entire call flow, if you will, how the solution works between Infoblox and Red Hat Ansible Tower. Basically, our infected workload on the bottom here, which is an unfortunate fact of life. Today's DevOps folks like us are really stuck dealing with a myriad of security challenges. You don't have to go very far down the path of your favorite search engine to find an example of something like a Kubernetes breach or a workload that was breached. This is sort of the what happens after that moment conversation, right? And generally what happens afterwards is an exfiltration attempt, or that is an attempt to pilfer or steal data from the on-premise network and get it out to the larger internet or to a destined target, right? So using Infoblox, Ansible, and OpenShift together, we can make an ecosystem here that prevents that from happening in its entirety. And the way we do that is through policy on the DNS engine itself, in the case of DNS exfiltration, as I'll demonstrate in a moment, but blocking, redirecting, or returning something such as an NX domain response, a no such domain response to a DNS request to the attempted attacker is a great way of dealing with this problem. It's akin to either dropping or resetting on a firewall. An NX domain is a bit more like a reset, where you tell the attacker that no, you can't go here, versus a drop where you can potentially create an air gap between the response and cause some time to happen there. Either way, whichever of these policies you choose to enforce on your Infoblox network, a security event and the ecosystem that Kevin was mentioning triggers an event. And that event walks up the message bus as follows. Something walks through the Infoblox ecosystem template. This is a framework that allows us to correctly format a message for the message bus and get it out to an outbound endpoint. In this case, that will be Ansible Tower's RESTful API. That outbound endpoint that we speak to uses a notification system. This comes from Infoblox. In this case, we're going to use DNS security event as the notification mechanism. And this can be a number of different kinds of security events, anything from DNS tunneling to a standard what's called RPZ, or response policy zone response. So any one of these kinds of events will wind up in an inline action. That is, Infoblox as the DNS server in this conversation will block and or log this particular query, preventing Slugworth, again, our infected workload or container from down there, from doing something terrible, but it also triggers this message bus flow. Right, so if we follow our bouncing ball here, the next step is action 4, and that is the integration point specifically between Infoblox and Red Hat's Ansible Tower. Now we're invoking Tower's ability and its extensible ability to fire off a particular job or an Ansible play. This is the part where we like to say, let your creativity run wild, right? Anything that you can program in YAML into an Ansible play can now become your reaction to a security infiltration, exfiltration, or other indicator of compromise. This means that you can go ahead and protect the infrastructure element itself that was under attack or attempting to exfiltrate data, and protect the rest of your pods, infrastructure, indeed the whole rest of the infrastructure from similar centralized attacks in a distributed fashion. So I'll shift forward here from the sort of slideware, if you will, down to a live screen share. If you'll bear with me for a quick screen change here, we should be now seeing the Infoblox interface.
We sure can, Phil.
Outstanding. Thank you, Kevin. So the Infoblox interface is completely web-based. Well, the human interface is a graphical user interface here. We'll also be leveraging our API backends, so the machine-to-machine interface, as it were, as well. And here in Infoblox, using an Ansible playbook, I've pre-created a bit of an infrastructure for today's demonstration. That infrastructure included automating the deployment of a few zones, some A and or quad A records for IPv6 support, and the deployments that are necessary for OpenShift to function, as well as Ansible. So Ansible and OpenShift in their distributed formats, I'm sure I don't need to tell my friends and colleagues at Red Hat about this portion, right? There's DNS that's required in standing up this infrastructure, never mind the workloads that this infrastructure is supporting as well. So OpenShift has some very specific records and some very specific DNS entries that are used to discover and speak to things like compute, storage, and networking functions. The same holds true for other cloud platforms. If you look into OpenShift, OpenStack, VMware, Azure, AWS, or Google, you'll find that bar none, every conversation between a client and a server begins with a DNS interaction. So it behooves us to have a good security stack built into our DNS as well, and that's what we're demonstrating here today. So Infoblox's monitoring system is paying attention to our OpenShift pool, and that means OpenShift as a service is represented as a particular DNS record for any consuming workload that might like to either run on it or connect to it. If we take a look inside our Infoblox grid, we'll note that I'm running today's demonstration entirely on a single virtual workload. in larger enterprise and, of course, service provider style deployments, you'll find that Infoblox operates in a much more distributed fashion than this. Our control plane and data plane are often and correctly separated. This permits for good security of the larger DNS and security ecosystem, as well as permits for fault tolerance through things like availability zones and hybrid cloud deployments. So what I'm going to start off with here is a quick peek at the Infoblox DNS zone that we're serving for today's conversation. Some folks might find this a little silly, but I'm a bit of a fan of an old movie called Willy Wonka's Chocolate Factory, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. So the theme of today's conversation is going to be a bit around the chocolate factories. You might have guessed with my Slugworth reference earlier. So in our zone here, we've got OpenShift, we've got our Infoblox Gridmaster, the DNS traffic controller, which is that Infoblox function, and the Ansible Tower solution itself. And what we'll do is shift over a bit here. And I'm also going to bring down our Ansible Tower screen into the forefront. So in the Ansible Tower user interface, it becomes obvious that there are some available number of Ansible hosts and some amount of pre-prepared Ansible jobs. And what we've done here is pre-prepared an Ansible job called the Infoblox job template. This template can be extensively used in any fashion. And this is, again, where we say, let your creativity run wild. If you'd like to open some kind of a SOAR integration or a ticket management solution, or heck, even just send an email to your manager, boss, or administrator while you're out there paddling a kayak in the middle of a river, you can do all of these things quite automatically with an integration between Infoblox and Ansible. Now, if we take a peek at our recent job runs, we'll see that this has been tested a few times, right? But all I'm going to do is start up our code-ready containers solution here and follow along on the Infoblox user interface for some syslog. Syslog is great for giving you the bottom line of what's going on. However, in the DNS world, turning on DNS query logs and turning on a heavy syslog stream can often lead to serious engine troubles around the DNS service. It's well known that enabling these kinds of logging functions in basic DNS servers can cause some serious problems in performance. Infoblox makes use of an out-of-band reporting engine and this out-of-band ecosystem integration in order to make sure that the DNS server itself is not negatively impacted by these kinds of events. So what I'll do is take a look at our OpenShift system, which is stood up over here. And our status seems good, but as you might see at the top here, just as a hint, I've launched a pod called .compromised app. Right, so in our project for this compromised app, there are a few pods. And we can quickly do in OC get pods, and that will tell us the names or the various pods that are currently running. Pretty short list for today, but again, please use your imagination to see a few more of these run in your production environment. Now I'm going to connect to this particular pod, and we're going to kind of put on our black hat moment, right? This is where I've just become Slugworth, because unfortunately, DNS and port 53 are open end-to-end as a necessity for networking, basically everywhere you look. An application finds its database server, its compute, its storage, its logging, everything using DNS as a protocol. And so it should come as no surprise that DNS is probably open between here and the outside world. Indeed, if we dig at probably one of the world's more popular DNS servers and say, let's find the IP address for infoblox.com, we'll find that the response comes back as a pretty popular solution here. Most people use a CNAME or a canonical name to have that www.website.tld to redirect to an actual server. So CNAME as a record type is an interesting and important record type, and we'll touch on that again in a moment. Right, but suffice it to say, we were able to make a DNS query here. So as the Slugworth, or as the bad guy in this conversation, that's really important news to me. So as I've broken into this particular container, we'll take a look at what's going on in here. We've got a pretty basic index HTML, an OpenShift directory as deployed by default by this pod, but a pretty important piece of data here as well. So that's our super secret data, and leaning back on my Willy Wonka reference, this is the recipe to the everlasting gobstopper. Boy, what Slugworth wouldn't have given to get the recipe to that everlasting gobstopper, right? So what we're going to do, quite briefly, is say, hey, Infoblox, or hey, DNS server, more importantly, would you please give me the recipe for a gobstopper? And I'll ask you to please pay very careful attention to the Infoblox job template and the activity meter in the background here for Ansible Tower. So when I ask Infoblox for the gobstopper recipe, the general policy is, sorry, Slugworth, go away. This is a bad query. We know for a fact if you're coming from outside our network and looking for this, that's not good. And what you just saw was the template kickoff. So starting right now on September 16th at 2:44 Eastern time, for those of us that may be in other time zones, that job template has kicked off. So very, very quickly, just to recap, that's a simple DNS query. This was a log, a simple DNS query from a container that through the Infoblox and Red Hat ecosystem integration, one DNS query is all it takes in near real time to make that job happen. And if we come back and take a look inside that particular job, we'll note that while it's a fairly simple playbook today, we're very sorry, Slugworth, but the recipe for that everlasting gobstopper remains safe and sound. As Infoblox has just informed me about this security incident, and we'll be running a security play that automatically remediates this issue by enforcing a firewall change, perhaps. Again, in this larger ecosystem, these kinds of changes can affect anything, but very, very specifically between our relationship between Infoblox and Red Hat, we may be pushing something like a new network policy for a true core-to-edge security ecosystem enrichment moment. Now, that's one example of a directed lookup, but we're going to go ahead and take this just that one extra step further. So this file that we care about, what we're going to do now is turn this into the Mike TV moment. And by what I mean by that, for those that may not be familiar with the Willy Wonka story, we're going to cut this file into 1 million tiny pieces and send it out using DNS over the internet and put it back together again on the other end. It will be the same chocolate bar or the same gobstopper recipe or the same social security number, list of credit cards, or other important intellectual property that leaves this data set and shows up on the other end. So in order to do this, I need to put on a black hat moment for just a second and generate a script that will execute a number of DNS requests. That's all we're doing here. So suffice it to say, I don't need shell access as a black hat hacker to make this happen. All we really need is a DNS process and the ability to execute some DNS queries. So now that we've started these DNS queries, you can see the file being chunked into small binary bits here as that host name dynamically changes along the way. That file is now currently being exfiltrated across the internet in the form of a number of small DNS queries. And if we are to review the transfer of that particular file to the other end, we will note that that file has now been sent, at least in part, as super secret data in the form of an actual JPEG file, which is what we're stealing here. Right, so if I back out here, you can see the super secret data file is currently being sent through the exfiltration mechanism and is slowly coming into resolution and becoming a reality as far as stealing data or pilfering data off of that network. Now, it stands to reason that I wouldn't be showing you this if it wasn't something that Infoblox could help with. So let's go ahead and pause this exfiltration or end it, and we'll go ahead and offer the same sort of solution, but in the big change here, rather than talking to that popular internet-based DNS server, I will now exfiltrate the data or attempt to exfiltrate this data, making use of the Infoblox DNS server, which is protecting this particular OpenShift pod. So the same exact sort of script. The big difference, of course, is now we're going to speak to the Infoblox DNS server instead of that internet-bound DNS server. Now, while I'm busy grabbing some copy and paste over here, I'd like to take a public service moment to suggest, even if you choose not to use Infoblox to secure your DNS environment, please make sure that outbound, otherwise referred to as recursive internet DNS services in all of your infrastructures are carefully monitored and carefully secured. As it will become obvious in today's demonstration, making use of any of these external DNS services opens you up to data exfiltration and DNS-borne attacks. So here we'll trip back to the Ansible dashboard and pay attention once again to our background for the recently used templates. As this exfiltration attempt continues and pumps through the Infoblox DNS server this time, the activity will trigger again. So you can apply policy and quite separate policy based on tunneling events versus specific just policy integration. And now Infoblox is protecting against the pilfering or theft of that particular data. And you'll note that the requests appear to be going significantly faster. That's not a visual aberration, as Infoblox is responding quite quickly to this solution, telling it, no, there is no such domain that you've been attempting to find. And in fact, if we come back to the Infoblox user interface, we'll note that Infoblox has generated also a common event formatted message. So in our larger security ecosystem, Infoblox will integrate with the automation platform from Red Hat through Tower and potentially directly into OpenShift in the form of a network policy, but also, of course, has prevented the problem from occurring, manages to report out in and of itself, and shares that with source systems through a commonly understood language in the form of CEF. Of course, if you log in as a human being to Infoblox here, we're going to show you quite obviously 406 block DNS hits. This number continues to roll up at amazing speed in the background. And we've detected this DNS tunneling event. DNS tunneling, of course, being quite different than DNS denial of service or other types of DNS attacks, which may trigger these sorts of DNS security ecosystem events as well, and be triggering different playbooks for different interactions. The bottom line at the end of the problem here is Infoblox has protected this solution, has protected the data exfiltration and implementation of stealing this data, and has shared the client's source IP address, destination IP address, and other critical metadata and information with the larger security ecosystem. So thanks very much for following along with our live demonstration. Unfortunately, Mr. Slugworth here did his best, but didn't manage to steal that everlasting gobstopper recipe from our Infoblox chocolate factory or from your personal network and applications. Thanks very much. Back to you, Kevin.
Thank you, Phil. And as we saw today, we have a great plethora of information for you to start learning from and start using what Phil has been talking about today. We want you to know where to find this. And we have several different sites that you can actually reach out to and get help from, including our community site. And this will have several different videos on how to integrate with Ansible, videos on how to auto-scale VNF, and other pieces to actually start using our ecosystem, and also Ansible and OpenShift today, and including any other additional integrations that we might have with Red Hat, right? Our community is vast. There's many people posting things there every day, so you might find additional resources for you to use. And of course, we have our normal Infoblox website, and also we have a YouTube channel for you guys to look through and start discovering some of the pieces that you might want to implement today. And of course, you can always reach out to support or your local sales reps, and they're happy to talk to you about solutions and different options that you might have for your security operations centers or even your network operations centers. You start improving your infrastructure today and maturing it to make it better for you and giving you that return on your investment on all your products, not just for the DDI solution. So at this point, we would take any questions and see if there's any questions out there from you guys, and make sure you come back to us with those questions. Phil, are there any questions on your side that you would like to address today?
I don't think so, Kevin. I think basically, as long as we have managed to review the fact that Infoblox and any Kubernetes-based platform is a really good automation function, I think we've sort of hit the point there. And of course, that relationship between Infoblox and the various Red Hat stacks of products permits for a certified and very usable solution there. So thanks for the opportunity.
Absolutely. And with that being said, thank you guys all for coming with us along this journey, getting to learn a little bit about the Willy Wonka factory and figure out how you can protect your gobstoppers within your own infrastructure today. Thank you for your time and have a great rest of your day.